Welcome to the Transform Your Relationship podcast, where we'll go beyond the typical relationship advice. I'm your host, Manisha Terry, somatic healing practitioner and mentor. Each week, I'll share personal insights, client success stories, and how my holistic trauma-informed approach can help you transform your relationship from the inside out. You'll learn ways to recognize and prioritize your needs, get to the root of what's upsetting you, and courageously ask for what you want so you can confidently co-create the relationship you desire. You'll also hear from guest experts who will be invited to share their unique approaches to transformation, and at the end of each episode, you'll receive one tangible practice you can implement right away to transform your relationship. Let's dive in. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Transform Your Relationship podcast. I'm your host, Manisha. I am happy to be with you here again for another week. I have been sticking with some solo episodes if you have been following along, just because I wanted to share some different ways that I've been working with folks and just the different things that have been coming up, not only in client conversations, but also in personal conversations with friends and family, and as we enter into a new season. So here it is late September. It is the Northern Hemisphere, so we just had our fall equinox a couple of days ago, and we entered Libra season for those of you who follow the astrology. And when we think about Libra season, or at least when I think about it, relationships is really the first thing that comes to mind. Libra is a very relationship-oriented sign. If you've ever looked at the symbol, has the scales of balance. So we can also certainly think about it as justice, which I definitely do, but we can also think about it through the lens of equality and balance and harmony. And so often I think that's what we are striving for, like within ourselves and then within our relationships. That's certainly something I talk about on this podcast a lot. And I like to always remind myself and others that equal or equality doesn't always mean everyone's doing the exact same thing, right? But it really means that we're both, or two people within a relationship, are bringing the things forward where it feels harmonious, it feels balanced, it feels like the right combination of things that each person is bringing into a relationship. And while this on the surface can sound relatively easy, I really think it's quite challenging because everyone has different needs and everyone has a different personality. And sometimes we don't even know exactly what we need. And a lot of times we don't necessarily know what somebody else needs unless we've known them for a really long time and we've built up that relationship and we have that conscious way of being where we're really tuned in to the other person and what they need. And that's ideally, right? And I'm saying using the words ideally, but over time, people in whatever kind of relationship you're talking about, certainly in a romantic partnership, but even in friendships or parent-child or sibling, when a parent and child, when it's a later relationship, certainly not when the child is a small child, people will start to understand and take into account and just hold that in the backs of their minds, right? When they're engaging with the people that they love, that, okay, this is their preference. I might not always be able to respond in this way, but I really want to do my best to show that I am holding them in my awareness, and I really want to show up for this person in a way that shows them that I am thinking of them. And even if I can't fully meet exactly what they want or need, I am showing up and doing my best, which I think in so many ways is really beautiful, right? Because everyone has a lot going on, and to be able to show up to your most important relationships through the lens of, I care about you and I want to hold that larger space for you, and I'd love to meet you in a way where you feel seen and you feel heard. And who doesn't want to feel seen and heard in a relationship, any kind of relationship? So this is sort of adjacent to what I wanted to talk about today. And that's this topic of emotional bandwidth or having bandwidth in general, because so often in the context of talking about relationships, I find that people, struggle with communication, maybe misunderstandings, like one person's saying something, but it's not necessarily landing in that way for the other person. And what I see around that a lot is that people are moving very quickly. And even though that might not be their intention, it's just what happens in practice. We live in a society that generally moves very quickly. And what's interesting, even just about this time, is that as in the Northern Hemisphere, as we move into fall and things are getting cooler, the weather makes you want to be more cozy and be a little bit more still and maybe more contemplative. There's almost like a spacious quality to that season in terms of the season of moving towards winter. But if we look at our culture and our society, if you've got kids in school, everything's ramping up right now, right? Like there's school trips and all of the homework and all of the activities. And if you've got multiple children, you are navigating a lot of it, driving and back and forth and schedules and talking to teachers. And then if you don't have kids, like maybe your work is ramping up and the summer was a bit slower. And as we move into fall, like lots of projects get put on the front burner. And so the holidays start to come up after that, and it's September, and I'm sure people are currently even talking about plans for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And, I get it. It's so understandable because we are in a culture that's constantly doing and constantly planning. And practically speaking, time can feel like it is moving by super, super fast, especially if you're in that constant movement, action, doing. And often it is really about survival, right? Like getting through one day and getting to the next. And it doesn't feel like there's a ton of time to have like a deep conversation or meaningful time to fully connect. And it can sound like a luxury. Like, who has time for that really? Or I just have to get to the next thing, or it already feels really crunchy. And I just want us to sit with that for a second, because while I do not doubt that that is what you might be feeling in any given moment, it can also lead us to feel like our lives and our relationships are in autopilot. And sometimes we need to be in autopilot, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes we're just in a place in life where that is how everything is going to function and allow things to keep rolling, right? And we don't really have a lot of wiggle room. However, if you're maybe struggling in a relationship and this is how things are moving along, like kind of on autopilot, it's really difficult to make any changes. And so absolutely, I think there are times in life where this is just the norm, given the society we live in and the demands on our time and all of that. And I also think that if you're in a relationship, both people in the relationship kind of have to be on board with this for a little bit of time and just accept that you're going to have to carve out other time, right, to be together in a different way that has a little bit more connection time, and that can certainly be with your partner, but it can absolutely be with other people, like whether it's your family or close friendships, because every relationship needs time and attention in order to deepen and grow and feel like it's nourished and nurtured. And quite frankly, I feel like we as people also feel the most nourished and nurtured when we can be in relationships where there is that give and take of whatever unique things each person brings to it, so that the other person can truly feel seen and heard and like you're really connected. In fact, so often it feels like this constant movement and constant speed, which can bring us really wonderful things too. Like if you're really dedicated to your work and you feel like that's your purpose and passion, like that's wonderful. So it can So these ways of working and being can certainly bring us good things. And at the end of the day, I think for most of us, it's the relationships in our lives that really enhance it. And so if you are struggling, in a partnership, but also perhaps in some other relationships to feel connected or feel like you just have time to slow down and connect, this whole idea of just having the emotional bandwidth is such an important piece, and I think sometimes a missing piece in the way that we think about it. So if you're noticing in your own relationships that maybe you are feeling a bit of disconnection with another person, and probably if you're feeling with another person, there's some level of disconnection for yourself, I would really invite you to think about, okay, is it that I don't have the time to slow down and connect with this person, or do I maybe not have the energy or the mental bandwidth to be present and still and focused? And that can sound, that might bring up some things for you, even just hearing me say that, but it's not uncommon, and I'm not judging at all because I have certainly done this, but it's so not uncommon for people to be like watching TV and texting somebody and, having a conversation with the person next to you all at the same time. So your bandwidth is really stretched, right? Because you're splitting your attention in so many different ways. And just by the nature of that, there can only be so much level of connection with anything that's going on, so much level of focus or attention. And so if that is constantly the way you're interacting with somebody else or they are interacting with you, it will probably have a little bit of a sense of, not fully being heard or seen, or just feeling like you're having a connected conversation. And like I said before, sometimes that is just the way that we need to operate because we are getting through a particularly busy time. However, if that's the way you always operate, and again, I say this all the time, if whatever you're doing is working for you, please keep doing it. I am never going to be here to say, hey, try something different, or what about this? Like when you're completely happy with how things are going. But maybe if you're not so happy with how things are going, you're either feeling disconnected from your people or you're feeling disconnected from yourself. And you're saying a lot of the time that, oh, it's just a time thing. I would really invite you to consider, like, is this maybe an energy thing? Is it a mental bandwidth thing? Or is it even an emotional bandwidth thing? And what can I do to help me get those things back? Or how can I expand some of that bandwidth? And I'm going to give you some ideas, but before I do that, I'd love for you to just pause and think about, what do you do, or how do you recharge or recover that energy for yourself so that you have the bandwidth that you would like in your life? And if not a whole lot came to mind, that's okay, because I will be sharing some of the things that I do, and maybe they will resonate for you or help spark for you things that you can do. But if some things did come to mind, then that's great. My next question would be, how often do you do them? Do you schedule them into your week or month in such a way that there is some level of consistency so that you're not only doing that thing when you feel completely spent and you need a break, but you are somehow weaving it into the course of your day or the course of your week so that you know that there will be a time where you get to rest, rejuvenate, and expand that bandwidth again for yourself so that you can, be more present in those conversations or be able to deepen in relationships and grow them in a different way. Or if you are struggling in a relationship where maybe there's a lot of arguments or frustration or resentment, then you're building up some of that bandwidth so that you can address it, so that you can do the work to help improve the relationship, along certainly with the other person. But it's really hard to do that work or get into hard conversations or get into conversations where you're going to be uncomfortable and you're going to have to bring up difficult things, and you're going to maybe have to talk about things that so much easier to push off to the side when you simply don't feel like you have the space for it, right? Or the bandwidth for it. And again, we can just say, oh, we didn't have time because our lives are so busy. And yes, lives are very busy. And I would guarantee that even if you implemented a couple of things that really work for you into the course of your day or into the course of your week, you will see a shift in spaciousness and just your ability to deal with some of that stuff. So I'm going to give you a totally non-relationship example, just so to put this in a little bit of context, but I'm sure we've all had those times where we've had to do this tedious tasks of perhaps calling a credit card company or calling your mortgage company or dealing with some issue with the internet or whatever, where it is on a to-do list and you might go through a day or 2 days or 3 days and just say, I didn't have time to do that. Meanwhile, if you checked how much time you spent on social media or watching something or be having some random conversation in the middle of your day, you realize, you know what, I technically probably had the time to do this, but I just didn't want to deal with XYZ, right? Like these things can be very tedious, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself. I don't know, but calling, being on hold, dealing with somebody where you have to share your problem or situation, sometimes getting help, sometimes not getting help, maybe being put on hold, like all of these things, they certainly require time. But for me, they also require a certain level of patience and tolerance. And if I'm just not in a space to offer that, where I feel like my bandwidth is just not there, I will put that task off, right? And this is something super, low, there's no emotional charge around this, right? Like if I'm dealing with some logistical issue, that is certainly low stakes compared to having a conversation with a partner or having a conversation with somebody else important in my life, where there is going to be not only the time, but also a requirement of patience and calm and being able to feel grounded and regulated and not reactive. And so sometimes we will use time, not having enough time, but it really, underneath it, is that the mental or emotional bandwidth isn't there. So again, before I get into some of the things that I do to support me and to help me in that, you might want to pause this in this moment. And if you have the time and space to maybe even take a couple of notes, but what are the things that you go to help you downregulate your nervous system, to create some of that space, to create some of that your own internal energy so that you feel like you have the reserves to not only have those moments of presence with your loved ones where you do feel like you're making like a real connection or having a deeper conversation, but you can also address in those moments when you're really struggling or you're having a hard time or you have to talk about something difficult, and it will bring up stuff. It will trigger you. It will bring up some emotional reactions. Like all of these things really take up so much of our energy. And we don't always think about it as how can I recover or recharge my energy so that I can have a better relationship. And as always, I have to give my little plug for my highly sensitive friends out there, because again, that is how I feel I operate in the world. And if you happen to be highly sensitive, you likely take in a lot more information and stimulation from the world around you. And so this can take up our bandwidth a lot faster than other people. So if you're in a crowded space or somewhere loud or somewhere where there's a lot of interaction or talking and you're with somebody who is not highly sensitive, you may feel drained after an hour and they might be able to go on for hours. So as I always say, this is not good or bad, better or worse. There's like no layers or hierarchy or judgment here. It just simply is. And so if you do identify as somebody who does take in a lot from their environment, then this is even more important for you because your energy is more easily affected than somebody else's. And it's not because there's something wrong. It's just a difference in the way that you process. And I am certainly this way. So I actually require quite a bit of downtime to recover and to rejuvenate. And I've absolutely been in relationships with people where that is not the case for them. So that becomes a different kind of conversation. Not that they have to do what I'm doing, but they simply have to understand that that's how I operate. So I might not be able to go as long at a party, for example, as they would, or do other things in the same manner because my system just operates differently. For my own personal management of energy and just being able to expand this bandwidth for myself, something that I've done for many, many years on and off or at different frequencies have been yoga and meditation. Yoga is something that I kind of started on my own when I was a teenager. It was something that I was simply drawn to, and I found a book and started practicing the poses. There was something really grounding about that for me, and that's a practice that I ended up, studying and teaching for many years, and it really is a foundation of just many of the ways that I bring my body and mind back to center. And I definitely don't practice every day. I don't meditate every day. I used to be a little more frequent and consistent, but these days I absolutely have that as part of my toolkit, but it's not something that I am doing on a regular basis. But because I have such a foundation and length of time in it, it is a really lovely go-to because over the years, my body has learned that when I move into these particular poses or I go into a certain type of meditation, it's sort of already primed to be able to start to slow down because of practice and habit. Those two things, practice, habit, and I would add discipline as well, will over time really help your body know, oh, okay, now it is time to start to slow down and create a little space. And I know that if I practice for a certain amount of time, my mental state will start to shift and I'll be able to navigate whatever is in front of me with a little bit more neutrality. Now, that is not always a guarantee, certainly, because I, like we all are, am human. And if there's something that has an emotional charge that comes up, I will have some kind of emotional reaction. Now, because I have either meditated or done some other kind of practice beforehand, my hope in that moment is to be able to pause, to not react in the moment, and end up, like we all have, saying something that we regret and that we have to clean up, and creating that spaciousness internally for me really is one of the best antidotes to not reacting externally. And I'll say that that doesn't mean that you don't have a reaction or you don't have feelings or you don't get upset or angry or sad, but the way you respond in the moment to another person can really shift that dynamic over time. So doing that work on the front end can help me get to a place that's a little more grounded. And even if I do have a reaction to somebody, to what somebody's saying or a conversation, I can then pause and go back and do my own reflection and work around it so that when I come back to that person, I can have something to say that at least feels like it's a representation of how I'm fully feeling. Because so often, if we don't have that, we might shut down, we might start crying, we might start yelling, we might start screaming. And I am all for feelings. I'm a big believer in having all your feelings, but I don't always think it's the most productive thing to have all your feelings in front of somebody and really not be able to get your message across, right? Like there are definitely going to be relationships where you will completely break down and cry and sob or yell, and people who love you will get that about you, right? So it's not about showing up and being a certain way or not being a certain way or hiding who you really are, but many times we're not going to be able to have a very productive conversation or like really speak up and express how we really, really feel about something if we don't have the bandwidth and we are suddenly triggered, and that leads us into either shutdown or a fight response, right? So it's really about what is the practice, or what are the practices that are going to help me be able to work through some of the triggers and get to a more neutral place so that I can communicate what I actually need to the person I'm in this relationship with, so that it does feel like there's real connection and the other person is hearing like what you really feel and believe and think. So I went off on a slight tangent there because I really wanted to make it clear that this is not something that you're doing so that you are a robot or you're completely neutral all the time and you have no feelings. It's really more about helping you modulate those feelings, because when you think about even something like taking deep breaths or doing some kind of breathwork practice or doing a yoga practice that really can help you support your nervous system, you're increasing that resiliency of your nervous system. And by doing that, when things come at you, when things that are charged or triggered come at you, it's more flexible, right? You're automatically able to like ride that wave a little bit differently, and you'll still have a wave. It'll still go up and down, but the way you ride it and the way you handle it and the way you come out on the other side in terms of being able to sit with the discomfort and communicate what you're feeling will be very, very different when you create that internal space for yourself. In the past few years, I have definitely added to my toolkit. I, about a year and a half ago, started running, which is something very new for me. I never really considered myself a runner or someone who could run. I thought the idea of even running around the block just seemed like so far-fetched and foreign to me. But I decided to give it a try for a few different reasons, and I'm a pretty slow runner. But I have found so much joy in it in so many ways, because it's just allowed me to be outside more, which I love, in nature, and like really feel the air on my face and feel like I can move my body in a different way. And I have really started to understand a little bit more of what people talk about when they talk about that runner's high. For me, I actually feel a lot more focused on the days that I run as well, which has been a really pretty cool side effect, which I did not know would happen. And so even though I don't run quite as much as I did when I first started, I still, when I do, I've really noticed a difference like in my ability to be present and focus. And that has really been something that I've incorporated into my toolbox. I'm also a big believer in acupuncture, and that's something that I do maybe every month or so. I don't necessarily do it to address a particular thing. I mean, because I'm running and I'm doing yoga or doing other active things, there's often a little ache or pain somewhere that I can always address. But a lot of times I'm doing it to literally find my own internal balance, as well as address maybe some physical thing that just happens to be coming up for me that week. But that's something that over the years, my body has responded to really well. And I always feel like I can get into a state of calm after that. So it's something that I do mostly for prevention, but because my body responds so well, I absolutely will go if I am having some kind of pain, or if I'm feeling run down, or if I feel like I'm getting a cold, or really anything that feels like I need a little bit of rest and reset. The acupuncture really tends to help a lot. Something else that I've recently started doing was I joined a gym. As the weather was getting colder, I knew I wasn't going to be able to be outdoors as much. I mean, certainly it's the fall and it's fine for the next couple of months, but I had been looking into just mixing up my routine a little bit, and it's been really fun to go to the gym and check out different classes and see what my body responds to. The cool thing about any of these practices is that we can play and experiment. So if you're not sure what offers you a little bit more spaciousness or bandwidth, then maybe make that a goal for you to explore and see what works. And as you've been hearing me talk, some of these things are very much being in stillness, right? If I'm doing meditation practice or I do the yoga, which is movement, but then at the end, if I'm meditating or being still, there are aspects of that. I also love to take walks in the woods. And so while I'm moving, there is an aspect of contemplation to that. But then there's also more intense movement, like the running or like going to the gym or lifting weights. And so there are so many things that can support the growth of our emotional and mental bandwidth so that we can clear our minds, but also like clear our bodies of the stress that we're holding onto so that we can be more spacious. And when you're feeling more grounded, more connected to your body, more rooted and centered, the way you show up for other people will absolutely reflect that. And that will completely change your relationship. And even if you're really struggling with somebody in a relationship and they are not showing up in that way, or maybe they're not doing some of that work to be able to show up, simply by you doing that work and showing up in that way will shift their response, right? Because relationships are a dynamic. There is a back and forth there. So frequently we are stuck in patterns where I show up this way, the other person shows up this way. You might even say the same things. Literally, you will think, wow, we're having the same exact argument or the same exact conversation again. And it's because it's so easy to get stuck in a pattern. But when you take that time to start to shift your internal energy, bandwidth, whatever you want to call it, it's absolutely impossible for the dynamic in your relationship not to shift. And the thing that we have to be prepared for, I think, on the other side of this is when we start to do some of this internal work for ourselves, we are going to show up differently. And that might make the other person react in such a way that they want to join us. But it also might make them react in such a way that they push back on how we're showing up and what we're saying and how we might be changing because they're used to the way that we've been. This has shown up with countless clients where they start to feel more grounded and centered, and they start to set some more boundaries and say how they feel and express what they're actually thinking. And their partners will push back on them because they're not used to that. And so I think that sometimes underlying it without us fully knowing, we might not make some of these shifts and we might kind of stay in autopilot because we know that when we change, the dynamic is going to change. And that can sometimes mean like the ending of a relationship, which completely understandable that that's not always the direction that we want to explore because for so many reasons it can feel scary and that's just not what we're available for at that time. And that is 100% understandable. Everyone's situation is so different. But I would, even in the context of that, really encourage you to think about how are my relationships feeling right now? Do I feel like I'm present in them? Can I connect with the people in front of me, especially in those most important or significant relationships? And if I feel like that's not happening, is it truly time, or are there some internal shifts that I can start to make to help me increase my mental and emotional bandwidth so that I can show up in a way that feels good for me and see how that shifts the relationship, because it can also be incredibly positive and deepen and allow your relationship to grow. So I hope this has given you some food for thought. It's a little bit longer of a solo episode than I had anticipated, but I would love to hear any thoughts you have. If you'd like to share, you can always email me or send me a message on Instagram. And if you'd like personal support with this is the work that I absolutely love to do with clients one-on-one. So again, you can always message me in the show notes, there's also a link to book a consultation. So if you are ready to make some really deep personal shifts in your own life and relationships, I would love to support you. I hope that you have a wonderful week and a beautiful start to this new season, and I will see you the next time. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode of the Transform Your Relationship podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to help more people find us so they can transform their relationships too. As a thank you, every month, we'll pick one winner to receive a free 45-minute one-on-one somatic coaching session with me to explore and gain clarity around a relationship challenge. And if you know somebody who could benefit from listening to the show, then please do share and help me reach more highly sensitive women who want to experience richer, more connected relationships.